On January 9th, 2007, in one of the more iconic press conferences of all time, Steve Jobs revealed to the public the first generation iPhone. At the time, it reinvented the way people communicated by combining, as Jobs himself put it, a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator into the pockets of people all across the world. About 6 months later, on June 29th of that same year, the original iPhone was released to the public. And while not everyone owns an iPhone specifically, that moment fundamentally changed how people interact with technology. It kicked off the widespread adoption of smartphones, pocket-sized computers that most of us now carry everywhere. If you own a smartphone, you know that Apple didn't stop at just those three main pillars. It's far from just a phone. It's a camera, it's a calendar, it's a GPS, it's a wallet, it's a flashlight, it's a TV, it's a music studio, and just about anything else you want it to be, depending on what apps you install. And that's really where this story begins. On July 10th, 2008, just 1 year after the iPhone 2G launched, and a day before its successor, the iPhone 3G, was about to launch, Apple launched the App Store, allowing users to download new applications to their phones depending on their interests. Early apps were simple and often silly. Fake beer drinking apps, digital lighters, novelty soundboards, fun little time wasters that showed off what touchscreens could do. But alongside those novelties, something else emerged. Mobile games. I personally did not have an iPhone right away. I was a bit too young for a smartphone at the time, but I did get an iPod Touch, which, for all intents and purposes, gave me access to the same ecosystem. And for people around my age who grew up with the App Store, there's a very specific kind of nostalgia tied to those early mobile games. Games like Doodle Jump, Fruit Ninja, Cut the Rope, and Temple Run. Some of these have stuck around surprisingly well. You'll still see them in arcades, in modern storefronts, or receiving updates even today. But among all of them, there was one game that truly broke through in a way nothing else did. That game was Angry Birds. Angry Birds released on December 11th, 2009, just 14 days before I got my first iPod Touch, and it's one of the first games I can remember that everybody seemed to have. It was unavoidable. Parents played it, kids played it, people who didn't consider themselves gamers played it. This thing was huge, and it still is a relevant part of pop culture. Angry Birds went on to become a full-blown cultural phenomenon. It spawned sequels, spin-offs, movies, TV shows, toys, theme park attractions, you name it. The characters became instantly recognizable, even to people who had never touched the game. I probably don't need to tell you this. You've seen them before. The Angry Birds are iconic, but they do come from humble beginnings. It all started with a simple game with a simple idea. In Angry Birds, you play as, well, the Angry Birds. Why are they so angry? Because green pigs stole their eggs, of course. To get them back, you launch the birds from a slingshot into structures made of wood, glass, stone, trying to eliminate every pig on the screen. That's it. That's the premise. But the brilliance comes from how much depth that simplicity allows. Different birds behave differently. Some split into three, some accelerate mid-flight, some explode, some drop bombs. Learning how and when to use each bird turns every level into a small little physics puzzle. The different birds add a layer of strategy and planning to each level and keep the game from getting stale. You don't get to pick the birds for each level, you have to work with what the game provides you, but you still do have to plan and strategize when you find out what birds you have for that level. And while the objective is simply to defeat the pigs, the game rewards efficiency and creativity. The fewer birds you use, the more destruction you cause, the higher your score climbs. If you're the kind of person who likes fully completing games, there's always an incentive to go back and do better. One of the most important aspects to the game, like with any great App Store game, is its simplicity. You can boot the game up and instantly understand how it's played. You don't need a tutorial, you don't need a manual, you touch the screen, you pull back the slingshot, and you let go. I believe that accessibility is a big reason why Angry Birds became what it did. At its peak, Angry Birds wasn't just popular, it was foundational. Outside of social media apps, it remains one of the most downloaded mobile games of all time. The series expanded aggressively. There were over a dozen mainline entries that stuck to the physics-based puzzle formula, along with countless spin-offs experimenting with new ideas. Bad Piggies, which shifted the focus to building vehicles rather than launching birds, is still one of my personal favorites. According to the Angry Birds wiki, there has existed over 140 interactive apps based on the Angry Birds series. There were also high-profile crossover titles, including Angry Birds Star Wars, Angry Birds Transformers, and yes, Angry Birds Rio. So by all accounts, this should be a success story with a happy ending. But if you open the App Store today and you search for Angry Birds, something feels off. You might expect to be flooded with the aforementioned 140 interactive apps based on the Angry Birds series. That is not the case. Instead, you'll notice something different. Sure, the birds pop up right away. Heck, at the time of this recording, Angry Birds 2 was still listed as the number 24 app in the action category. But if you grew up with Angry Birds and you were looking to revisit an old favorite, you're likely not going to find it. Where's Angry Birds Space? Where's Angry Birds Star Wars 1 and 2? Angry Birds Seasons? Angry Birds Stella? Angry Birds Rio? They're gone. Delisted. Some of these games can still be accessed through older devices or alternative methods, but many are effectively unplayable through official channels. And that raises the obvious question: what happened? In 2019, several of the earliest games in the franchise, such as the original game and Angry Birds Seasons, were delisted from app stores. The official explanation was that these games could no longer be updated to meet the modern technical standards. Negative backlash then prompted Rovio, the developer, to respond by announcing remakes of these discontinued titles, and in March of 2022, we did get the first of those remakes, known as Rovio Classics Angry Birds. Did I say first? I meant to say only one of those remakes. As of January 2026, none of the other promised remakes have materialized. And even that single remake had a strange fate. In early 2023, Rovio Classics Angry Birds was removed from the Google Play Store. It does remain available on Apple's App Store, but under a different name, Red's First Flight, a rebrand that noticeably distances itself from the rest of the franchise. Why? You may be puzzled by this decision, but if you play some of the newer Angry Birds games, you may begin to understand why this happened. Let's take Angry Birds 2 as an example. Despite the name, this isn't really a traditional sequel. It features improved visuals, refined mechanics. It's really nice to look at, but it's built around a familiar mobile monetization model. Angry Birds 2 has one of those energy systems that is far too common in mobile games. If you fail levels, you lose energy, or hearts. When you run out, you either wait for it to recharge, or you pay to keep playing. In the original Angry Birds, failure just meant trying again. In Angry Birds 2, failure means waiting, or paying. I believe that Rovio Classics Angry Birds had its name changed not because the developers were looking to give it a shot in the arm, but because it was doing too well. For $1.99, you got the original Angry Birds again, the full package, all the levels, everything. And people were buying it. The problem with giving players access to the full game is that there's no further way to monetize it. The game rose up the App Store charts and began to detract from the newer games, like Angry Birds 2, that were designed to suck more money out of consumers. I want to be very clear here, I cannot definitively prove intent, but it's not unreasonable to suspect that a one-time purchase version of Angry Birds, a complete game for $1, didn't fit neatly into the modern mobile business model. That classic remake gave players everything up front, no energy timers, no recurring purchases, and by many accounts, it performed quite well. So it's hard not to notice the pattern. Why was it quietly rebranded? Why was it removed from one platform entirely? Why have none of the other classics returned despite being promised? There may be legitimate technical or licensing challenge behind the scenes, and if that's the case, I encourage people to look into this themselves and come to their own conclusions, but from the outside, it feels like the games that built the franchise simply don't align with how the franchise now makes money, and that's where the real frustration comes in. Because these weren't disposable games. They were well designed, thoughtfully balanced, and genuinely fun. Losing access to them feels like losing a piece of gaming history. At the end of the day, I think the community just wants access to some more of these great games again. The Star Wars spin-offs and Angry Birds Space were some of my very favorite iPhone games growing up, and it's a real shame that there's just no way to play them conveniently on my iPhone ever again. There is a bit of a silver lining here though. When Angry Birds was at the peak of its popularity, the developers actually released home and handheld console ports of a few of the games. While these versions have been delisted digitally, physical copies are still relatively affordable and accessible. There were 2 of these home console releases to be exact. There's Angry Birds Trilogy, which was released on the Nintendo 3DS, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii, Wii U, and PlayStation Vita, and there's also Angry Birds Star Wars, which was also released on the 3DS, PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, Wii U, and PlayStation Vita, along with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Angry Birds Trilogy remasters the first 3 games in the series: Angry Birds Seasons, and Angry Birds Rio. And Angry Birds Star Wars just includes Angry Birds Star Wars with some additional bonus levels. It's cool that we have these from a video game preservation standpoint, and it is great to have a way to play these games, but there is something unnatural about playing these games with a controller. Angry Birds Star Wars on the PS4 does include touch controls. You could play it with a touchpad, but it doesn't exactly feel right either. If you've ever played Angry Birds on your phone and then you try this, you'll know exactly what I mean. These games were so clearly designed to be played with touch controls, but it does work, and I will say these versions definitely do the games justice. Still, at this point, I'll take what I can get. And that's kind of the tragedy of it all. With no re-releases in sight, these console ports may be the most reliable way to play some of the best Angry Birds games ever made, and that shouldn't be the case. Especially when the characters are still very much alive in pop culture. There's another movie on the way. The brand is still recognizable, but the games that started it all, the ones people actually fell in love with, are slowly fading into obscurity. Of course, anything is possible, and I remain hopeful that the classics will return someday. If someone from Rovio happens to be watching this, I urge you not to forget where you came from. I hope this doesn't come across as bitterness. It comes from appreciation. These games mattered. They helped define an era of mobile gaming, and they deserve to be remembered and preserved properly. Just give us our Angry Birds back. Thank you for watching.